One of the few advantages of getting old is that you have a reasonable amount of experience, certainly hopefully over a reasonably long period of time, and things which people previously said were impossible become the everyday, whether that's landing rockets or it's video calling, or in this case, relevant to us, it's being able to take a mix and split it back out into its component parts. So this is something certainly I can remember in the 90s people said was impossible. Now it's become kind of everyday and commonplace. So the first product I knew of which did this kind of thing was Celemony Melodyne, which you can see on screen. But I think something which has really accelerated the adoption of this is the open sourcing that Deezer did of their splitter library, which, as it says here, is a separation library. So this separates audio out into its constituent parts, and it's been used. So you can see here it does 2, 4, and 5 stem separation. And it's been used in a number of commercial products, as seen here. So whether or not they're still using this, I'm not sure, or whether they've moved on. But certainly, you know, they name check Isotope, Spectralayers, which we've seen on the channel before, Acoustica, Virtual DJ, and a DJ as well. So Algorithm DJ. But what we're looking at today is something which apparently doesn't use this, and that is RipX DAW. So RipX has been well known for a few years for doing this kind of splitting, but now they've decided to move on. They've made what they call a DAW. So this is linking this ripping ability with its ability to manipulate effectively its output. So 6+ stem separation. You can edit these note by note, even AI generated music, which we will look into all of this in some level. So we're going to take a look at this, and also it's got some, we're actually going to be running the RipX DAW Pro. So there's some extra stuff in there. So there are a few caveats to this video. Firstly, this video is long. I spent quite a long time on it, and I will be honest, I thought about not releasing it because it is really long. But then I thought, well, you don't have to watch it. I'm not, sitting you down a la Clockwork Orange and pinning your eye open and making you watch it. There are bookmarks in here. You can just skip to the bit you want to see. I'm warning you up front. The next thing is, I was actually asked to make this by Hit and Mix, and in response for making the video, I've been told that I will get a license for RipX DAW Pro. I don't think this has influenced my opinion of the software. I think that will become clear as the video goes on, but I want to be upfront with everybody about it. So this is the first time anyone has approached me in this way, and I'm marking it as such. The other thing is that they have been very clear to me that they want to accentuate the fact that they feel you shouldn't use this product to infringe on people's copyright. Copyright is important as far as I'm concerned. I'm not sure whether or not the current copyright laws work in the best way, but that's a topic for more intelligent people than me and a different debate. But certainly, I'm putting what they actually said on screen right now. So I agree with this. Don't infringe people's copyright. Use this for creative purposes where it's appropriate. Certainly, I've used stem splitting for work on people's own work where they've only got access to a stereo mix, and then I can split it out. We can do some subtle manipulation, which has been really useful. And in fact, one of the things I've done is I've actually turned down the guitar on a recording I made a long time ago because I didn't realize just how loud I'd made the guitar, and it kind of ruined the song. But there you go. The last point I want to make is that this is my impression of this. And I think if you really want to learn something, you need to spend months, if not years, learning it. And I haven't done that. I've spent a few days playing around with this, certainly, and I've spent more time trying to make the video than I have actually using the software, because that's the nature of making YouTube videos. But certainly, I'm thinking about this from the perspective of, if this was my desert island DAW, would I still be able to make music while I was stranded in some kind of paradise stroke hellscape, depending on your point of view? As a result, this is my personal opinion of it, and there's probably things I've missed. The manual is large. There's a lot of user interface stuff, which is quite different to certainly every other DAW I've worked with. Some of it grates on me, other bits I really like, and this is my opinion of it, and that's all it is my opinion after all. So I just wanted to plant that particular flag there, because I am not the world authority on this for sure, and I've just come to this, as many people would do, where you get the software on a demo, you have a read through of the manual, and then you dive in, and then you see what it's got to offer you, and then you refer to the manual when you get stuck. So that's really the caveat. So now we're going to head off into the program with all of that stuff out of the way. Sorry for the long intro, but it's an even longer video, and I really wanted to make sure all of this context was put in place, so I wouldn't be accused of being one-eyed or anything like that, but also to make sure that you're aware of the situation as far as copyright and the application and everything else is concerned. So with that said, let's get into it and take a look at RipX DAW. So here we are in RipX DAW, and as you can see, the user interface has a fair bit to take in. It looks reasonably simple at first, but you can see all of these areas can be expanded, and then within them there are settings as well, which we will look at a bit later. We're not going to look at everything. I'd originally thought we're going to look at everything in the whole video, but actually this would be a really, really massive video and take an enormous amount of time to produce. So we're just going to look at some straightforward activities, and I think that will probably be enough to make you decide whether or not you think this is for you. So first things first, let's do what probably everybody would do, which is to open up an audio file and let RipX DAW deal with it. So you just go to File and then Open. We're just going to pick a song. This is a band I was in back in the day. So just going to open this up from our only album and then rip it. So this are the options that you get. So you can pick which instruments you want to have ripped. Now, I'm going to rip all of these here because I think they're kind of all in there. And we'll see what we get for other sounds and instruments. And it says it's estimating it's going to take about 5 minutes. The time that it takes will vary depending on the computing power you've got. This is a MacBook Pro M1 Max with 64 gigs of RAM. So it's pretty specced out for what it was back in the day. I know that if you're on Windows, you can download the CUDA drivers if you've got an NVIDIA card to allow the processing to be offloaded to your GPU, and it promises much faster performance. I've not actually done testing on that. I will try and do that before the release of this video, so maybe later on we'll have a section just showing the difference in performance, but they certainly promise that it's faster. But it takes a certain amount of time. It's typically around how long it is in real time, I've found on here. Sometimes it jumps forward, but we'll skip to the end of that, and then you can see what it comes up with when it's finished the rip process. So as you can see, the ripping is complete, and we get the final display in the middle of the screen here. And first things first, generally I found its detection of tempo and time signature, etc., is pretty good. It seems to align well. It certainly aligns much better than the detection that Cubase does. So there's something to be learned there, isn't there? The display is quite interesting because it shows the notes, so we can see all the different layers which it thinks are in there, and they're color-coded, but also you see not just the sort of piano roll here, but also pitch changes. So it's a little bit like the Very Audio display in Cubase, but I quite like it. And also you'll see a bit later on that when you add effects to it, you see the effect of those effects reflected in this here. So it's quite interesting from that point of view. Now, let's take a look at playback. Now, in terms of options, there aren't many here. So preferences-wise, if you go to the Preferences menu, so in the Preferences, there's not really much to choose from. Now, you've got the playback device, sample rate, and the output folders, and that's it. So there's not a lot of configuration available. One thing that I've noticed with this is if the device isn't plugged in when RipX is started, it doesn't appear in here later, so you may need to restart depending on what you've got plugged in, which is what, in fact, I just had to do to get the UMC appearing so we can hear what's going on. And now, if I play it back, we just get playback of the track. So I'm not going to play too much in case there's some weird copyright thing going on there, but that's definitely a track I own the copyright to because I was in the band and we paid for the recording. It's straightforward in terms of isolating different things. So if you literally just wanted to remove the voice from a track, then you could just mute it. You can control the volume here. So you've got this. I don't like this user interface style where you don't see the controls until you hover over them. So this is something certainly I found in classroom teaching really, really destroys people's confidence because they're like, I don't know where it is. I'm sure there's lots of people who think this is a great idea, and it seems to be something, a real thing with programmers at the moment, where it's a fashion for these disappearing controls that only appear because then you get this incredibly minimalistic appearance until you're doing something. But I'm not a fan of it. I think all of this stuff should be discoverable without having to move your mouse over it. But there we go. Moany me, starting again. We can expand this here so we can see whether we're adjusting the panning position, the low, mids, and highs for each track. So you can expand that there, and you've got your volume as well. So let's take just the example of, let's say we just decide the guitar is too loud in here, which it probably is because it's me playing the guitar. And we can just turn that down. Well, here we are at it. So you've got the limited ability to remix this, which is pretty standard. Certainly Spectra Layers offers this kind of thing, and Control, etc. Muting, soloing, and so on. We can look at recording. We'll do that a bit later on in the video, but the Control is quite interesting because let's just solo just the bass, because Gary was a great bass player, if a slightly strange man. Now, obviously, there's some processing artifacts in there. I think that's the case with all of these things, but it does a pretty good job, and in the context of the mix, it sounds okay. I like the way this plays back. You can see what's going on as you play everything back, but what's interesting for me is that you can grab individual notes, and it segments them pretty intelligently, and then you can just change the pitch where they are. So let's say we just want to move that up there. Right, so let's say we just wanted to change the start of that to there, and now this will start. So it works quite nicely for that. You can obviously just, undo, etc. You can group things together. So let's say this was a phrase we wanted to link all together. You can group that with a keyboard shortcut, and now we've got a group there, and now we can move them in synchrony. It's probably a terrible idea in this particular example, but you get the idea with this. The editing is available, and most of it seems to work reasonably intuitively once you spend a bit of time playing around with it and possibly read some of the manual. Now, the manual is fairly long. I think it's one of the cases where it probably should be written from a process point of view, so it should take you through a few examples. Now, there are video tutorials, etc., so you can go through those, but the problem I find with video tutorials, ironically, is that you are fixed at the rate of the person who's doing them, whereas with a book, you can speed up, slow down, depending on your needs. It's easy to stop because the book doesn't have a pause control. The pause control is in your mind. Anyway, editing, etc. with this, we will look at in a bit more detail, but you can see that certainly if you wanted to do a bit of remixing or stem production, etc., this works reasonably well. I say the detection of these things is pretty good. So let's just take a look at maybe the voice, which doesn't happen until a bit later on. And we get this display here. Well, here we are, and it's just like before. So again, there's some artifacting in there, but it's not too bad. And the editing, say, it's reasonably competent here, and the editing is certainly detailed enough to be able to do a lot of the things you'd kind of want to be able to do in a DAW. But I think most interestingly about this is the fact that it acts as a DAW in a way which certainly I'm not aware of seeing before, because it blurs the distinction between audio and MIDI. So that's what we're going to look at next, is using it as a DAW rather than just as a kind of ripping and stem production tool, granted with some editing, but we'll look at what's happening on the right-hand side of the screen in the next section as well, because I think that's where this gets much more interesting. So RipX DAW says it's a DAW, so let's try using it as a DAW and see how we get on. So first things first, we're going to make a new project, which is called a Rip, and we're going to rename it. So let's call it DAW Test 1. Now here's where you may get into some murky waters. Hopefully my learning and suffering will pay off some dividends if you decide to take this particular journey yourself. So in the default, we've got a click track and nothing else. It looks like we've got more than that. This is slightly confusing because we've got the same sort of thing for layers as master, but there we go. And we've got drums, which we can add. We can add all these other things. Strangely, there's a gap between them. Not sure why that is, but let's add drums. So we just click drums here, and that puts it into this list here. And then we need to pick our input. So you could pick anything. I'm going to pick my MPK Mini. Just make sure that's highlighted here. And now when I play, it will be played on the drums. And you also see we get a kind of scratch track appears. Now, this is a problem which I've seen a number of times where just the audio just stops. I'm not sure why, but I'm playing it and suddenly I'm getting nothing. Now, typically I find if I hit play, that normally resurrects it, and now we're back. So there's definitely something going on. This is something which has happened a number of times. I've had issues with the click stopping playing, which tends to be resurrected once you've hit record, etc. So it certainly doesn't seem to be without some little glitches and weird behavior, but this is something which I think potentially could put people off because you think, well, is it me or is it it? I'm not sure whether it's me or it, but I'm fortunate enough to have enough experience to not care so much and think, well, we'll keep going. I think a lot of people would give up, but that's my opinion. Anyway, let's just try recording some very basic drums. I'm going to start off just recording the kick drum for reasons that will become apparent other than my inability to play in time with the click sometimes. So just going to play a bass drum pattern. When you hit record, you get a countdown, which is a bit weird. I expect a count in, not a countdown. At least it doesn't start from 5. That's a bonus. But we'll do that and we'll be away. Right, so there we've got that. It's not super in time. Yeah, I'm not sure why. I find it quite difficult. I'm not sure the response to this is perfect. I think I'm better than that. We'll fix that in a bit. We can rename this group. So this automatically creates a group. So we can just call that kick. Now, let's look at fixing this. So you would think, I know, I'm just going to drag this out to become a full-length part. No, what that does is that actually time stretches it. So that can be useful because we can fix a lot of the issues there. And then we can highlight any of these notes if we want. And then we can fix the timing of them under time. So now, the selection that you get seems to depend on your selection because there in time, I'm not getting that until I scroll, even if I close some of these other things up. So it's easy to get lost in this, but here's quantized time. So what we're going to do is just quantize these. Now, another area where this is a little bit confusing is this here is the quantized division, which we can set to something sensible, such as, well, quarters in this case. And this is the quantize amount. So you've got 2 hidden controls. So this is like setting how hard the quantize is. In fact, we're going to set that to 8 instead. And then set it to a bit more than that. So it's going to drag that mostly into time. Still a bit slack. So it's like got the potential to be good, but the controls, I just think the user interface, it needs some work. For me, I don't like hidden controls. I definitely don't like doubly hidden controls because then it's like just this, oh, what have I got? I don't know until I put my mouse over it. Let's try and record some snare. So now we're going to just go back to the beginning, hit record, and then just add a snare. So the snare is just going to be on D. So that. So this should be fairly straightforward. So in case you're wondering, I'm hearing that in time with the click in my head, but then it's coming up early. So I'm not sure what's going on with latency or compensation, etc. But I'm not the best player of keyboards, but I'm definitely better than this. Anyway, we can just move these along because you can see once they're moved along, they're reasonable, and then we can quantize them. So let's just quantize them to, there we go, that will do. And again, we can call that snare. Now, the thing you may notice is these are not in the position I played them on the original keyboard, and they're not where you'd expect from a general MIDI assignment. So I've not quite got to the bottom of why this is, but it gets weirder. So the hi-hats playing on F sharp and A sharp, and if I record those, here's where we definitely leave the building. So I'm going to go back to the beginning, going to record that. So again, mundane, probably out of time. Let's just set that to 8. That's kind of the recording process. Now, what I find interesting about this will become much more apparent when we start recording audio. But certainly, if you select a particular note, we get the sound section pop up. So let's just collapse all of these others. And you can see that that kick, we can change the sound of it to, let's just click on that there. And now when we play it back from the beginning, so we can change each individual note sound. So let's change this one to be that as well. And here we're getting the issue where it's helping me by expanding all these things, and I don't want that. What I want it to do is to stay as it is. Again, there may be a setting for this, but I've not found it particularly easy. So with this, I found this is slightly counterintuitive, because if you just click on it, then it changes the sound completely to that. So this kick now is just that kick 2 sound, okay? But if you hover, let's just move that up so we can see it a bit better. If you hover over it and then change the fader, you can add in a bit. So we can have a bit of kick 1 and kick 2 as well. So you can hear that is now, it's got both of them in there. Took me a while to get the hang of even being able to do that. So you can do this, but you need to start from the beginning. If you just click on kick 3 now, it will totally remove those. So now that's become just kick 3. So I can put it back to kick 2, but then I need to fade in a bit of kick 1, and maybe I'll fade in a bit of kick 3 as well there. So you've got quite a nice amount of control here, even though the sounds themselves, they're not so great. We'll look at how you can use VST Instruments a bit later on, because that's also pretty different. If you were building up an arrangement, I think it would be useful to be able to change these groups into larger time-based divisions, you know, bars, beats, etc., that kind of thing, and build bigger building blocks that you could link together. So it's got some potential, but I'm still not quite there yet. Now, it is possible to group groups. So there we've got a group of groups. So I've got my kick, snare, and that. And let's just call that drums, because I'm so original. And then we can duplicate this should we want to do so. So if I zoom out, then I can, if I hold down Command, Control on Windows, I'm pretty sure you can make another copy of it. And then we've got 2 bars of terrible drums. So far, yeah, interesting. Now let's add something else into the mix and see how we get on. So now we're just going to add bass, because it's more of a melodic instrument. So I'm just going to click bass here, and then we get this bass sound. Yeah, pretty standard. So interestingly, you may notice on this part of the screen, when I'm playing on the MIDI keyboard, it's also highlighting the fact that you could play it on the computer keyboard. So if I highlight the computer keyboard here, and the up and down cursor keys, will let you play different octaves. So that's reasonably nice, particularly if you haven't got a MIDI keyboard. But I'm going to stick with the MIDI keyboard because it will be slightly more useful for me. And also notice that the drums have disappeared into the background. If we hover on them, we will go back to those. But because we're on the bass, we've got the bass highlighted. They've just faded into the background. So I'm just going to make up a quick and terrible bass line to go with a few bars. So that will do for that. And we can see all that MIDI information that's been recorded and then is translated into a bass. And again, you can pick different instruments, etc. So we've got bass and so on. So we could fade in, we could have some bass and then maybe have a bit of, if we like that. And let's have a bit of Mellotron Vox in there, because why wouldn't we? So here you come across one of the limitations which I've found on a few things, where things are stretched out of their normal octaves, etc. And then we get a situation where the notes, I guess the notes are just so far out that we're getting these weird artifacts in there. So depending on what you put in there, you may get all sorts of squeaks, pops, burbles, this, that, and the other. So it sounds quite strange, a bit frog chorusy, etc. I'm actually going to take that out. Sounds like someone's at the door, etc. So you can play around with these to your heart's desire, etc. So that, again, it's an interesting idea. I wish it worked a bit better, and we will see a bit later on when we put in an instrument, a new instrument, what the sort of limitations of this are. So this is kind of showing its sampler-based roots, I guess. But I think the thing that's interesting about this is if you start recording actual audio. So that's the next thing we're going to do, is adding audio to this project and seeing how that comes out. Okay, so now we're going to add some audio. So to do that, we're going to add a guitar. Let's just call it guitar, mostly because I'll be playing the guitar. And then we're going to change our input. So our input is going to come from the UMC. So this is the audio interface. So we're going to record from there. And let's just record some fairly straightforward guitar. So there, it's pretty much detected what I'm playing. It's not perfect. That's not actually what I'm playing, but I don't think it has any way of knowing what the inversions are that you're playing. So that would make sense. The notes are there, certainly, in that one there. So it's not a million miles off. We can hear what I've played. Now I'm just going to turn this down because otherwise it will be apocalyptically loud. If we click this, so you can hear what I played badly. So it's sort of sensed what I'm playing and has picked this up reasonably well. This is one of those areas where it's sort of the overconfidence of machine learning and artificial intelligence, etc., because it's potentially, for a beginner, it's confidently telling it that this is the chord that's being played when that's not actually what's happening. But yeah, I think that's the world we live in now, isn't it? So that's not too bad. Let's add another track with some rhythm, etc., kind of a melody. I'm just going to make up a riff, basically. So we'll just add another guitar track. So let's add another track of guitar, and then we're going to do something interesting with the audio. So this is where the glimpse of the future is, I think. So what's interesting with this is the audio doesn't appear until a bit later. So it's kind of a bit off-putting as you're recording, because you're thinking, well, maybe I haven't played it, etc. But it is pretty much tracking what I'm doing. If I play this back, So you can see it's picked up the notes pretty well. We can do all the editing we were talking about earlier on, so changing this, fixing any issues that I've got. But also, this is where it gets interesting for me, because it's possible to use this information here to mix in some of these synth sounds effectively. So let's say I wanted to put in a bit of Les Paul with it. So I can just fade that up, and now we'll get... Bring that in. So we get this interesting thing, which for me, I think this is the most interesting part of the whole program, is the fact that it's kind of a synthesis between audio and MIDI, and it's almost not caring what you are dealing with because it deals with them in the same way. I think that's really interesting. And if you think, you know, maybe in 5 years' time, we could have something which would do this in a seamless manner, and I could play in on the guitar something, and then you could turn it into a really, really good other instrument or a voice, etc., which you're controlling with all the expressivity that you've got on one instrument and the sound of another, or a composite of them, and you could add them all in. And that, I think, is probably the most interesting part of this. Certainly, I think it needs quite a bit of work on the user interface, etc., and a number of other areas. But this has got real potential because it's a fantastic way to have literally a synthesis of different sounds and instruments and put them all together. That's pretty much it. I think in terms of the tools, it would take a long time to go through all of this. And I will be honest, I am not an expert. I've spent a few hours with this, playing around with it and seeing the potential of it. And there's a lot of editing which is available. So all of these kind of standard tools you would expect, you can add in. Now, what I think I alluded to earlier on is it's interesting. If you add an effect to this, you see the effect of it. So if we put some reverb on this, you can see the reverb on screen. I really like that because it's giving you a visual representation of what's happening. And then we get what I have seen a number of times with this, which is that RipX DAW quits unexpectedly. I've had this probably 4 or 5 times in the days that I've spent playing around with this. And if you haven't saved your project, it's gone. So you need to save regularly. You know what's coming. This is something which I'm not sure I would expect to see at this frequency. I know obviously Cubase has had problems with things disappearing, but that tended to be, certainly in my experience, tended to be things where it was problems with third-party plugins, etc. Here, we haven't used any third-party plugins at this point, and yet it's crashing more than occasionally. And also, this is on a Mac where there isn't any weird hardware. You know, the hardware is the hardware, and that's one of the things where people, you know, often say leads to more reliability. Certainly, I wouldn't expect it to have crashed this many times. So this is something which has happened, I think 5 or 6 times, certainly that I can remember. And yeah, it just instantly disappears. And I've not seen anything in particular which prompts this. It's just one of those things that happened, which is a pity because we were in the middle of something fairly useful. But we're going to move on now to looking at how RipX DAW deals with VST Instruments, which is, again, a bit different from everything else. So here we are in a new rip, and we're going to add an instrument. Now, this does not work in the way any other DAW that I've seen works, certainly. So in a typical DAW, you would install the plugin, put it in a folder, etc., and then you would have access to it and play it in real time. That is not the way it works in RipX DAW. So what you do effectively is you are sampling the sound of an instrument, and then that becomes one of these sounds here. So by default, virtual instruments, we've got a few things in here, but we're going to add an instrument here. So we're going to click the little cable, and then we're going to import. It calls this importing an instrument. So I'm going to choose Surge. I'm going to pick Surge here. And here is Surge in the background. So I can click Audition. I'm sure I would be able to make a better job of it than that. But let's pick just pick a sound. So let's just pick let's pick Moogie Saw. So that's a reasonable sound. And then what we're going to do is import that. So let's just call it Surge XT Moog, sorry. Or I'll get in trouble for that, won't I? And then click import. And what this is doing is this is effectively sending MIDI to it and then importing all those samples. So that should be there now. So let's close that. And then if we look under Surge XT, we see Surge XT Moog. So now if we pick our MPK, and then let's add a keyboard, but make it 100% Surge. So now let's pick that sound. So that's what it felt the Surge sounded like. So it's a little bit strange. Let's try another one. So you can hear with that, with the resonant one, it's certainly, you can tell that it was actually that synth. So it's certainly doing some interesting processing to it. It doesn't necessarily sound like the original. I think this is one of its limitations. So it doesn't work in the way a typical DAW works. And as a result, it doesn't work in the way that a typical DAW works. So you're not going to get access to your favorite sounds in the way that you typically would. You're effectively doing some kind of multi-sampling. It's doing some analysis on them and then changing them significantly. So certainly that resonant one sounded a lot more like it than the... Yeah, so it's an interesting sideline, but certainly I think for a lot of people, this is not going to be the way they're going to want to work, although it will open up new avenues of sound manipulation and so on. But there we go. That's one of those things you're just going to have to think, well, this works in a different way. It would be great if this integrated in the way that a typical one did, and you could just send effectively this MIDI data here to a VST instrument, but that's not the way this works. And I guess they have to be applauded for at least trying something different, even if maybe it doesn't work in a way, certainly that I would want to work. But there we go. It may be exactly the way you want to work. So on the right side of the screen, there are a number of options which are available. And in fact, you can drag this section out to make it quite a lot bigger if you want to. There doesn't appear to be a way to make it fold in and out quickly. And certainly I've had some trouble with things showing themselves when I don't necessarily want to. So when you click maybe on a different instrument, you know, you may end up with a different element of your rip showing different things. And sometimes I've had it that the things I don't want turn up, but there we go. So we're just going to look at some of the effects here. Some of it's straightforward. Now the level, for instance, is actually separate to the level control here. So if I move this, let's say minus 25 dB, you can see this is actually at 0 there. Not entirely sure what the difference is between the two of them, but certainly when I've been playing around with some drum loops that I imported, this seems to have a different effect to just being a straight volume control, which is pretty interesting. Now, my caveat, I've already moaned about this, but I'm going to moan about it again. The disappearing controls here, they really don't work. I've tried to get used to them, but they just kind of don't work. And the fact that you can click them on and then off as well. And if you accidentally do this, okay, you can undo, but it's a bit perilous. It's one of these things where everything's got 3 functions, and it's much better to have, you know, a power button and then the controls, etc. But let's just take this vocal bit here and just go through some of the effects. So that in your plan, we could be found. So there we've got the vocal with those processing artifacts, but we're just going to deal with that. So we've got chorus here, which you can turn on, and then you can see the effect of the chorus, which I really like this. The fact that you can see what that effect is doing. So that in your blood, we could be found. You know, and it does sound like a chorus in the true sense of the word. That it sounds like there's multiples there. You've got all these options here, so you can see we're adding extra voices, and they spread out. You can see the effect, and you can hear the effect. That in your blood, we could be found. Anyone who's ever recorded a school choir will be very familiar with that kind of sound. So yeah, it's got a limited range of control, and you can control how far away they are. So we can, you know, make me have more of them, but fewer apart. And then maybe we'll get a slightly less, like a football team doing their FA Cup single. That in your blood, we could be found. You know, that's not too bad. I think it's worth tweaking, but it's the kind of thing where we've all got so used to the level of control that you get, where you get multiple controls where you can do that. It's a pity that we don't have access to that, aside from any complaints about the way that this is accessed. But you can turn it on and off pretty easily by just clicking on it. Reverb, again, another nice one. We see the effect. We've got a limited couple of controls. That in your blood, we could be found. Again, not too bad. And then we get into some more interesting things. So these are like the quick ones. It's like the greatest hits here. So you can see that this is actually in the time section here. We're going to look at these here. Now, the important thing is here, you can actually set the scale. So it can auto-detect it, or if it hasn't done so, or you want to override it, you can just click down here. And then I'm going to pick A major, because that's the scale that we're in. And then that makes a lot of these pitch-based things work better. They're not perfect, but they're a lot better than they were. And that's a very similar thing we've seen in quite a few DAWs, where you set the prevailing key, and effects and editing, etc., will make reference to that. And we can see the grid has actually changed as well. So the grid allows us to stick to the key that we've set, or a scale that we've set as well, because we've got a reasonable choice of different scales here. Yeah, I'm not going to randomize those, but that kind of thing. So if you've got something, you can set that and then start making these edits appropriately. So if we look at flatten pitch, for instance, you know, that will flatten it into the key in question. Without the key set correctly, it doesn't work too well. But with it set, that in your blood, we could be found. You know, and you can go for full on, totally flat, you know, with it 100% flattened. That in your blood, we could be found. You know, and that's not too bad. And if you don't set the key, it's a much more messy affair. Vibrato is interesting, but it seems to be applied all the time, you know, and you can really go full on, like, you know, singer well past their best kind of levels of vibrato there. It's an interesting effect. It sounds a bit Dalek-y stroke, you know, Radiophonic Workshop. That in your blood, we could be found. Now, I haven't found how you can make that, for instance, fade in, etc. We can control the speed of it, so we can go really crazy, or we can make it slower, and we got the amount. But it would be nice to be able to have that linked into the onsets of each note. But I haven't found a way to do that. Maybe there is one. And then we've got harmony. Now, again, this is always a bit of an interesting shoot, because it doesn't necessarily respect the laws of harmony as they would be if you were studying music, as it were. But that in your blood, we could be found. You know, it works in some places, and other places it definitely doesn't. But it's nice to have that option. Formant shifting works reasonably well, so you can change the formants and then effectively change the tone of somebody's voice without changing the pitch of it. So by bringing them down, we could be fine. Sounds like somebody else's voice, and this is what gets shifted when you just do normal pitch shifting without the formants being taken into account. That's why you end up sounding like Pinky and Perky. And we can go the other way as well. You can have much higher. So you get Pinky and Perky, but without shifting the pitch, which is interesting. So that's a bit of fun to play around with. Harmony we've already seen. And then in this time section here, so if I expand this and get the chance to see it a bit fuller, which again is always a bit, it's like you've got to grab hold of this, and then we still can't go down enough. So then we've got to do more. And then finally we get to see what we want. So the handling of these is a bit frustrating. So we've got reverb, delay, chorus, flanger, reverse, warp time, etc. So let's have a look at warp time, because I think that's the first time it becomes something interesting. And then we've got this effectively time stretch of this, you know. Well, this kind of misbehavior lets me taste. Yeah, that again, that works pretty well. The engine, as far as this is concerned, is reasonable. I think it would be interesting to hear it with non-split audio, because it's already been kind of compromised by the fact you've got this audio which has been split out from an original mix. So you've got some processing artifacts in there, and then this process is adding more artifacts. So it's not actually straightforward to just import audio without it ripping it, because I haven't actually found a way to do that. I tried doing it with some drum loops and it split them, which is kind of helpful, but it would be nice to just go, you know what, don't do that. Just treat it as normal audio like I've recorded it. I've not found out how to do that, even though I've tried my best to find it in the manual. Quantize time, fit to bars, etc., that kind of thing. And we just got the ability to shift, etc. So, you know, reasonable. And then we've got some level control here. So we saw level, panning, stereo pass, etc., low pass, high pass, saturation, which gives it a bit of distortion, but it's nothing, you know, nothing really to write home about. So filter notes. So this removes quieter notes. Now, in this particular, you can see just there. So if you look at this note at the end, that here there is a note which is being filtered out. So once we get above 35%, you can see that. But this is a fairly compressed piece. So this will remove those quieter notes, and also mean when you're exporting to MIDI, etc., they won't be in there, which anyone who's done that kind of thing or played a guitar synth will know. All those little ghost notes are the things that really screw things up. We've got a gate, we've got compression, you know, all fairly piecemeal effects. Workmanlike, all of these effects, I think, come under the, really, I'd sum them up as being, you know, okay. I think it's a pity we don't have access to more controls, because I think most people who've used a DAW will be used to being able to set everything. And a lot of people are like that, you know, but while having effectively like one preset effect with two knobs you can tweak is okay in some respects. I don't think this gives the kind of depth of control and editing that most people will be used to. I also think that's the case for the user interface widely, but I'll get into that in the summary at the end. We've got some presets. So these presets actually apply multiple different effects. So that these are a way of adding multiple things at the same time. So you can see that Harmony Plus Combo gives us these multiple things added in. So if we apply this, we can see we get, we could be fine. You know, which in some contexts could work with a bit of tweaking. So it's doing multiple things at the same time. It's quite nice to have that, and also that you can bring the effect of that in and out. So say there is some nice stuff in here, but I feel it just always rankles with me a bit. Then we've got repair. So again, these would be more useful on source material where you've got these particular things. So removing tones and hums, you can set this to the specific tone that you want. So, you know, often it's 50 and 60 hertz, or they're multiples, which are the problem. So purify clears up the unevenness in notes in terms of levels and harmonics. So Let's see if we can hear the difference in this.
That in your plan, we could be found.
Let's try that without.
That in your plan, we could be found.
I'm not hearing a huge difference with that. Overtone level, again, is to do with the harmonics which are present, and the fundamental level. So this is to do with the audio detection, which is probably one of the reasons why you can't just wang something in, but it would be nice for it to be able to just be put in without it being split at all. So having this overtone level and fundamental, this is one of those sort of glimpses of the future again, where being able to do this and it do it intelligently, and if it works well, you know, being able to control the balance of harmonics in something without needing to resort to really complicated EQing, because if the note's changing, then the overtone and the fundamentals are moving around and often they can get confused. So that's quite a forward-looking tool if it works well. Now, if you're as old as I am, then you'll remember that back in the day, learning an instrument was quite different to how it is now. So I started playing in the early to mid 80s, and state of the art, as far as I was concerned, in terms of learning the guitar, was buying guitar magazines, getting some lessons from a local person, hanging out at gigs, watching things on the TV to try and catch what you could. And in my case, I went full on and started buying American guitar magazines like Guitar Player and Guitar World, etc. I learned an awful lot, but definitely spent a lot of time listening to the music that I liked and trying to work things out. So I'd just stick a record on and try to play along with it. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Yeah, it was a long process, probably not as efficient as it could have been, but in some ways it stood me in good stead to blag it at gigs, etc. We won't go into that. Anyway, what might be a surprise given the fact that I teach music technologies, I was really, really very much into sort of neoclassical prog metal stuff. So loved Yngwie Malmsteen, but a particular favourite of mine was Tony McAlpine. Absolutely loved his first album, Edge of Insanity, and spent ages trying to work all this stuff out. And the only thing you had to do really was to play it. And because, unfortunately, that was only available as a 33 RPM album, if you didn't have a record player that would slow it down, it was pretty difficult. You might be able to slow it down by, you know, modifying your record player or finding a 16 RPM one, but it was pretty tough. So you were stuck pretty much with what you got. There were a few things you could do, like playing around with the mix, phasing things together. I actually found this out by having a pair of headphones with disconnected earth, and suddenly you could hear things differently. But in this case, it was pretty difficult to hear. This is something where I think actually RipX is really useful, because it not only does the stem ripping for you, but also because, as already mentioned, it attempts to try and find chords, try and display notes, etc. Makes it much easier. So on screen, I've actually ripped the first track from Tony McAlpine's album. I'm not going to play it because I definitely don't want to get a copyright strike, infringement, whatever for it. But it's been really interesting for me listening to some of this and hearing things that I never really knew were there. So one of the things is on this particular track, the whole album's, the bass is played by Billy Sheehan, who's an incredible bass player. And just listening to him play bass, you know, in some detail. Yeah, that was me, sorry. Yeah, just that is quite interesting, hearing the accenting, and obviously it's, you know, subject to all of the normal sort of distortion you get from the ripping process. But certainly at the end of this track, there's something that I've never noticed before. So in the very end section, when everyone's sort of shredding and showing off, there's this whole section here which I never really appreciated was there, because I knew they were playing around, but it's actually... You know, obviously it's at the limits of the ability of the software to make the stems, because there's a lot of other noise happening at that point. But there's notes in there which definitely fit. And then listening to it afterwards, you can hear that in there. So this is a really useful learning tool for learning anything instrumental. So I definitely wouldn't have been able to play like Tony McAlpine, but certainly having listened through this in private, some of the guitar parts, you can really hear what's going on. And one of the things I was definitely guilty of back in the day was mishearing, harmonies, maybe just sort of making them up in my head and then playing them, etc. Which when I started out, I was really bad at. I used to play things like a fifth out, etc., because I had zero musical skill, ability, or training. And as I got better, I got better at that. The chords that it suggests are not right. I've tried playing along with this, and they're sort of related to the right chords in some place, but it's definitely nowhere near as complicated as this. So there's some interesting stuff happening. It would be interesting to see the logic behind this and what's going on, but that's not something we have access to. But certainly just listening to this very first piece of the guitar here, there's some structures in there and there's some rhythmic stuff happening there. I've never really picked out clearly because there's a whole lot of, big hair metal action going on with other tracks, and hearing this more clearly is really useful. I would killed for this when I was like 16 or 17, literally would have killed for this. So being able to do this on any track and actually work it out and hopefully improve the quality of guitar tuition, but also, I don't know, maybe make some slightly more accurate tabs than some of the utter junk that I see where it's like, are you kidding me? That's nowhere near right. So yeah, dedicate yourself to this. This is a really good tool for this because not only it does the rips, obviously spectral layers, all that will do that as well, but it gives you some clues with the notes. Saying not every note is right, definitely, for sure. But the fact that it gives you some indication of like the melodic shape of what's going on, and that can be a useful clue, and often is clue enough. When you used to see people's hands moving on the guitar neck, you'd see them in a video or you'd catch them at a gig. The number of things that I learned just watching guitarists' hands gigs was incredible. I mean, admittedly, I did look like a murderer because I used to just go there and stare at the people on stage, but that's all forgotten about. It wasn't videoed. It didn't happen, right? One of the things I've seen quite a lot of in the marketing for this particular product is that it's the first AI DAW. Now, I'm a bit picky. I think you should differentiate between AI and machine learning. Everything we've seen so far is from machine learning. If you're not sure what that is, it's different to artificial intelligence in terms of it is trained on a specific task. It's shown in the cases of all the stem ripping stuff, it's basically shown the final mix and the stems, and it works out how you can get one from the other. So it's more complicated than that, but that's the thing. When people hear the term AI, they think something will be intelligent and it will evolve as time goes on. So in other words, all of us are intelligent. Even the people who say they're stupid and this, that, and the other, we are all intelligent. We gain new skills and abilities as we grow older. And no software that I've seen in this context actually does that. And certainly it's not generally intelligent. It may be able to do a specific task, but it can't do the dishes or avoid a pedestrian on the road, etc., those kind of things, even with our best efforts. So we're a long way away from things truly being artificially intelligent. With that aside, let's click this brain icon and see what happens. So what actually happens is you are taken to the Hit and Mix site, which are the makers of RipX DAW. So you could just go to this anyway. I'm just going to, I'm going to reject all the cookies because that's the kind of guy I am. This has developed since I initially saw this. So when I first looked at this, there were only 2 available. There are now 3. So we're going to take a brief look at all 3. Some of them you may need to have an account for. Certainly the Google Music FX one I needed to get on the wait list for when I first took a look at this some time ago, because this has just taken far too much time. So we're going to look at all 3 and see what the situation is. So let's find out. Here we are on this site, which I literally have never seen before. So let's just click Make a Song. And let's see what happens when we click Create. So I need an account. So I'm going to sign in with one of these accounts. So now I've just signed in. I literally just clicked on the Google sign in and just authorized it. So let's try the same prompt for all 3 songs, because I think that's a fair way to approach it. So we're getting a bit of a clue on the prompt here. Let's try "1990s house track with synth stabs, offbeat bass and syncopated percussion." I'm just going to copy that because I'll probably forget that. And let's click create and let's see what happens. Let's see. So we're going to take these. I've not heard these before. These could be, well, let's just play them. Here's the other one. Feeling so alive, sweat dripping down. Gonna survive. Hands up in the air, let the music take control. No inhibitions, we're gonna let it flow. Oh, jump to the beat, get your body moving. Dance floor with fever, there's no time for losing. Well, yeah, I guess I wasn't specific as to whether or not it was just that the lyrics contained the things that I'd answered for, or whether the music did. Yeah, this is a bit like visiting a stock photography site and just asking for something and it kind of turning up, where it's like it's some people would be fine with that, and that's not the worst thing I've ever heard. My suspicion is that maybe the vocals are generated, but the rest of it isn't. Yeah. Topic. So I guess it just picked house track. I'm not sure how that was generated. This is one of those rabbit holes I could fall into and spend too much time looking at it. Let's try the remix button of this second one. Okay, so style of music, up tempos, 90s house. So this gives us more of an idea. So this is more sort of getting into prompt engineering. Let's just change this lyric here and see if we get the actual lyric that I've asked for. So I'm going to go music tech tuition. No, let's do it as separate words. Right, I've got in my mind how I want that to sound. And yeah, let's just create that and see if it comes up with the same music again. So this is, you're seeing this in real time. So if you've not seen this, then neither have I. This is certainly an improvement on the other things that I saw a couple of months ago when I last looked into this. We get new graphics, if nothing else. All right, let's see what Dance Floor Fever V3, well, number 2 is like. Okay, you can't see this, but I'm actually smiling. I think the way it attempted to make the lyric that I just threw in scan was actually better than certainly some of the studio sessions I attempted to run back in the day. Let's try the second one. Oh no. Okay, yeah, that wasn't my bag, but at least it seemed again to have sort of a coherent style to it. It wasn't something that I would particularly like. It sounded sort of a bit more sort of tropical in some areas, but yeah, I quite like that for what it was. So let's click on that and let's copy the song link. But let's also see if we can download it. So let's not download the video. Let's just download the audio. And there we go. We get an MP3 file, and then we can just repeat the process so we can import it into RipX DAW. I'm sure it would, have some fun with that, etc. But you're seeing this in real time as I'm seeing this one for the first time. That's actually reasonably good. Certainly if I was stuck for inspiration, I would probably come onto a place like this, see what turns up, and then use that as a starting point, because there are a couple of little bits in that particular one. I thought I could work with that, and it's been a long day, and for something to make me think, oh, you know what, I could work with that. I don't think it's too bad. Now let's look at the next service. Interestingly, when I tried this earlier, which I think was in late December, this did work, whereas now it's not available in my country. I certainly had to sign up for a waiting list, and a few days later was able to do so. But at this point, my creativity does not beckon, because I can't make music just like this, which is a little bit annoying. So we got there in the end with stable audio, had a few missteps, needed to log in, and then the site seemed to have a few wobbles, but now we're up and running. So I'm just going to paste in this, and then just on the default options, click generate. Let's see what happens. Right, let's have a listen. Well, that was pretty basic. There were some elements in there that I think I'd asked for. We got some of the way with some semi-syncopated percussion, sort of offbeat, etc. But the audio quality clearly wasn't as good as the Suno one, unfortunately. But it wasn't nothing, and it reminded me of some of the things I used to hear in the 90s, driving home from work. So let's just see if we can improve this, or rather change this. So let's look at this. So we've got some prompt libraries here. So for instance, we've got this. So let's look the prompt library. So we see here we've got more information in here. So let's just try putting in 1990s. Beat the drum machine synthesizer. So this is really clearly giving you this much clearer prompt to work with. So this is hopefully going to help us get what we want. And let's just put in offbeat synth bass and syncopated percussion. And let's see if that helps. Let's see what we got this time. Yeah, so that probably had more elements in there. Whether or not that was coherent musically, less sure, but there you go. In terms of if we wanted to do something, let's say we wanted to take this track here, the previous one, again, we can just download the track as an MP3 or as a video. We're not going to download a WAV. I'm not going to upgrade my plan. But, yep, can download it as an MP3. Again, I think all of these things are much more jumping off points than they are going to be something where you just go, yeah, that's the finished track. It's a bit like, I guess, the idea of, you might want to generate some artwork using an AI generator, but it will be rough and ready and have weird elements to it, and then you could fine tune it. We're certainly not at the point where, for anything other than the lowest quality work, you're going to be being replaced by this. That's not to say that's not coming in the future. And the future may be here a lot sooner than many of us think. But at the moment, these are interesting experiments and it's interesting to see them develop. But it's certainly not something where I'm thinking, well, I need to go and get another job at this point anyway. In terms of their integration into RipX, I think hosting a link page is probably a bit of a stretch in terms of its integration. It seems a bit overplayed when you've got this brain icon with an arrow, etc., and yet actually it's a link to third-party elements which anyone can use in anything else. Obviously, the nature of the stem ripping that is present in RipX DAW means these are probably more usable and can be used as basis for whatever you want to do with them. But yeah, again, I think it's a bit of a stretch in the same way I could say my site is powered by AI and just provide a link to these 3 publicly available tools. And I'm sure there are far more than this. This is something where I've just not had the time to get a deep dive into it. And that even if you do spend some time on it, in 6 weeks' time, everything will have changed because things are moving really quickly in this domain at the moment. So this is just a bit of late-breaking nerdery. So at the beginning of the video, I mentioned Deezer's splitter, which is used by quite a few different packages to provide the unmixing capability they have, but RipX wasn't in that list, and for good reason. Fortunately, Hit and Mix have done the right thing. They've included the licenses of all the open source packages that they were using, which is what you're supposed to do, but not everyone does this. So these are available in the program folder on Windows and within the app sort of structure on macOS, and that's what we're looking at here. And just taking a quick look through these, there's all the normal sort of usual suspects, FFmpeg, but one of them is interesting is Demux. This is the piece of software which is used, by the looks of things, to provide the stem splitting. So we can see it is available for download, so it's open, it's from Facebook research. There's quite a few things that Facebook has actually contributed, so despite my concerns about them in many, many areas, one of the things is they seem to open source quite a lot of stuff. And this is one of those things. So you can see it does music source separation. We've got, yes, quite a lot of complexity there. I've never used this. It's fairly old, but clearly has been used. Something I'm intending to look into to see about how these different things work, etc. But that will be fairly nerdy and certainly not a mainstream sort of MTT video. But it's good to see that that is being made available and the licenses for all the other things. So you can see actually a lot of what is being used here is open source stuff, which they are making use of. And this is a good thing to see. So if you're that way inclined, you can see the tools that are being used and maybe start looking at potentially even using them yourself. Although obviously there's a great deal to what they've done. It's not a case of you can just download these and then magically get RipX DAW out. So now I'm in the position of trying to do a summary of something which has been pretty difficult to produce. So I actually started this video in mid-November. I've taken quite a few run-ups at it. It's been pretty difficult. This is something where I can only describe it as I've not found a really good handhold to attack the subject at question. Normally I can write a bit of a script, I noodle around with something and you feel you have an angle on it. But this I just didn't quite get there for a number of reasons. So firstly, I want to say I think this is a really brave attempt at doing something different. So it's not a case of we just went, you know what, we're going to just have an open source version of Cubase or whatever, or create our own sequencer. They really have done something quite different here, which I think I've tried to convey. The ability to rip these tracks and then handle the notes directly from that ripped audio, I think is really interesting. And I genuinely think this is a glimpse into the future. I feel a bit like this, like the first time I ever saw VST Instruments in, I think, 1995. And it just felt like, yeah, that's the future. This is one of those moments, and I don't have them that often. You know, maybe every 3 or 4 years where you think, yeah, that's the thing. That's going to be a thing. I think this will be a thing. I think this kind of tooling and technology will make its way into more mainstream DAWs. The blurring of the difference between audio and MIDI, which to a degree happens in all DAWs because there's some common tools. I think being able to have an entirely consistent tool set between the two would be a fantastic thing, because then you wouldn't have to think about what you're working with. And there is that here. But the problem is, in this case, it comes along with limitations which personally don't work well for me. I'm used to recording things and them sounding exactly as they were and being able to change them in a particular way. And this doesn't give me that. It gives me other tools, and I'm sure I'd be able to make use of them and create something quite different to what I would normally create. But A, there's a bit of a learning curve there, and B, I don't think it has some of the features I would like. Could do with a mixer. I don't think this area here is adequate. I would want to have access to a mixer and just be able to do a lot of this stuff in a nicer user interface, being able to see everything that's going on at the same time. Talking about being able to see everything going on at the same time, generally, as I've probably made clear, not a big fan of the user interface with the disappearing controls, the multi-disappearing controls here, etc. Didn't work well for me. I would much rather see a more conventional one with, admittedly, more space used up, but disappearing controls are something I've never liked. I still don't like them 20 years later after first seeing them. I don't think they're a good idea. Yeah, I think I've made that clear, haven't I? Then we come on to the AI element. Now, there's two parts to this. Now, obviously, you can argue that the stem splitting is AI. I think calling it machine learning is a much better way of describing it, but everyone's on the AI bandwagon. It's AI, this, that, and the other, so I guess we're stuck there. But the AI generation just feels like something bolted on, almost like by a marketing manager who just went, we need to have more AI. This definitely isn't the fourth most important control here. I'm not sure why we have this, and yet we don't have locators, time display, those kind of things, all of the standard kind of controls you would have on most DAWs. It seemed disproportionate, and until recently, with the latest of the 3 current generation sites which are linked, the results really weren't that great. So the latest one is a bit better, and it's a sign of things to come, but you can find that anywhere, and it's not really something which is part of RipX. It's just something that they've done a bit of integration with. So overall, summing up, months of playing around and hours of recording, loads of things ending up on the cutting room floor or just redone. Am I going to be using RipX for my next DAW project? I am not. Am I going to be using it again for doing other things? I probably will. I certainly think in terms of analysis and learning, it's really useful. If I've got situations such as, I don't know if any of you are Genesis fans, but at the end of Supper's Ready on the remastered version, they changed the last bass note. Why would you do that? It gives you the option to undo the errors of people where they've made maybe inadvisable choices. So, you know, changing bass notes, etc., that kind of thing would be quite good. So it does give you access to that in a really simple and straightforward way. It doesn't do this processing without some artifacts, and I don't think this kind of processing will do potentially ever from some of the things I've read, but given where we are, it may well not be the case, and the naysayers may be wrong. It might be possible to get all of this out with much more clarity and much less artifacts, etc. Yeah, I appreciate this has been a very long video. If anyone has stuck to the end, very well done. I salute you for your diligence and dedication to the cause. I hope you found this useful, even if it just means that you don't spend hours and hours noodling around in RipX DAW, and some of my pain and learnings have been worthwhile. And as ever, hope you found this video useful, and we'll see you again soon for much more relevant, much shorter, actual music tech tuition.